Hey everyone. Wanted to take a quick second. Although the slide shows Hurricane Helene, which is the current disaster that the southeastern eastern seaboard of the United States is having right now. We had talked about Hurricane Katrina in the first discussion, and I mentioned to a couple of you in visiting with a gentleman named Ken Bouvier, who was the deputy chief for EMS of New Orleans EMS. Had the opportunity to hear him as a speaker on a number of occasions. He's a great speaker. So while he does tend to lean toward EMS topics, if you get a chance to hear him speak, he is well versed in disaster management as well as other broad EMS topics. But he had spoke at one of the conventions I'd went to, or shortly after Katrina had kind of settled and the world had started to move on, and he gave us some insights into some of the things that happened during Katrina, and it was really informative. So a really brief, high-level overview, and I will tell you that in looking at the discussions, everybody's hitting on a lot of those topics, but it's kind of interesting to hear it from a guy who was there, so to speak, versus a video or a book session, if you will. Communication was a major issue, both prior to the disaster landfall, because, and many of you mentioned, there was a lack of communication interagency between FEMA and other agencies, but even within state and local communications. And we've seen that happen before when I've been involved in disaster responses. Now, Kansas EMS, where I'm most familiar with, really took some of that to heart. And nationwide, they've done quite a bit in reallocating radio channels and things like that for better intercommunication. As a matter of fact, at one point, they had reallocated some of the changes in the radio frequencies, and it actually made it possible for us to communicate not only with other agencies, but within our own agency across state lines, which, line of sight, so to speak, precluded that in the past. So they've really done a lot. And I was watching the news this morning early on, and they had the Verizon CEO talking about what Verizon's trying to do to help mitigate some of the communication challenges, not just for the public safety sector, but the public as well, because communication is key. I have a friend that lives in the North Carolina area, and she was talking about that they had to relocate out of their home. The only place they could get cell service was at the Walmart parking lot, and they could only get about one bar, but they were able to send out a thing on Facebook so their family would know, hey, we're safe. We're relocating to the shelter here. We'll let you know more as we can. The other thing that he talked about was just the post-disaster recovery. Now, he spoke a lot of times about EMS response and things, and he said New Orleans was certainly impacted in terms of ambulances and things like that. He showed one slide on his presentation of a mail truck, and he said we kind of commandeered this mail truck because the postal service was not delivering mail at that point, but we still had to make responses. So it was a vehicle that was operable, and they were able to use that to get around and make responses and stuff. But he said response times were through the roof, just simply because still had down power lines, all the debris, all those things that would impact your typical traversing of a city or metropolitan area. And then, he spoke about the logistics of taking care of your folks. He said some of those people were on duty for a week, and obviously they had time where they took them offline and had them sleep or rest or whatever. He said, but they didn't go home for some of them for a week or more, because they just stayed and tried to help. And he had showed some laundry hanging out. He said they kind of improvised and washed their uniforms and stuff in the sink and tried to kind of stay clean and such, but that they had to hang their laundry out while they were off duty so it would dry and be ready. So just managing the logistics of taking care of your people. He said, because obviously we had to help feed them and find them places to stay, because some of the stations were not they couldn't stay in some of the stations due to the damage and things like that. So relocating them and trying to make sure that everything was going on. He said the other thing that was really a challenge was the financial perspective. He said trying to make sure that keeping the financial records so that it could be submitted to FEMA and the U.S. government for reimbursement was a challenge, because a lot of times their computers didn't work, or they didn't have accurate receipts, or different things like that. He said, so sometimes those could be a challenge as well. So really, it was a really informative seminar in which he spoke. But, from our perspective, takeaways: communication, logistics, taking care of your people, things like that are going to be key. And you've hit on a lot of those. And many of you hit on other things as well. So kudos on that, because we have a small class. Sometimes discussions can get somewhat bogged down in trying to exchange good ideas and information. So great work on that. We'll be starting off week 2, and we should have an announcement with a video in there as well. So great work, everybody. If you have questions, reach out. If not, I will see you in the class.